All right, hello everyone. Welcome back for another episode of Owning Your Sexual Self. I have a very intriguing guest on the show with me today. When I was reading over its bio, right? I don't want to fuck this up. I was like, okay, there's a lot of words, there's a lot of things going on with this person that I'm very curious about. And I was saying, like, felt a little imposter syndrome, like, shit, I should know this. But also, I'm a student of my craft, right? So I'm also wanting to always learn and educate myself more. So welcome Yash to the show. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so we connected through the space of Intimacy Professionals, which is an online group that meets once a week, people from all over the world. So you have people like me, sex educators, sex therapists, sex coaches, sex workers, surrogate partners. Like, I mean, such a range of people that are in that space, which is really cool. And so that is how you and I got to connect. And actually, this is our first time connecting face to face. But here we are, and we're going to have an awesome episode today. So let's dive into it. I want to hear more about you. And so let me start with the pronoun thing because I think that that is so important. And right, so often when you're working primarily with cis people, right, it's like, okay, she, her, he, him. And then you come across things like I just did a little bit ago, Ezra, when I was trying to record your intro. So you have it, him, faers. Can you
Yes.
tell us like how that came? Because I know it seems like you're this bold person that wants to like fuck the normative, right? You're not trying to fit into a box and all of that. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, so it used to be like before I came out as trans, I was figuring out kind of my identity and I was going by all pronouns for a while and just hearing different people test different things. I found different things that vibed with me. And for me, a lot of that was figuring out my gender is very masculine in a sense. I identify more as a boy, but I'm very feminine in how I express myself. And I also identify somewhat as non-binary. So a bit of both. And so for me, like it's kind of felt like a safe ground that would just like encompass my gender that didn't have the gender fit into it. And then he, him kind of highlights the more masculine aspect of my gender. And then Faye Fairs highlights the more non-binary, which kind of throws some people off, but to me it has more like fairy vibes to it, which is fun. So then it's like, here's something that kind of fits that. So that's kind of how I came across those three in particular.
And are there fares, is that this is something that other people use? Because again, this is the first time I've heard of this. So this is common. Like you're not the only one that decided I'm gonna be
I don't know a ton of other people who use them. I actually had a roommate once who he used the exact same set of pronouns as me.
Mhm.
So, like, there are other people that use similar pronouns to me, but since it's like a neo-pronoun, it tends to be used less. Or I know lots of people who would like to use neo-pronouns but don't feel comfortable because it's such a stretch for people that are kind of new to that realm. But it's they, fair, fairs, kind of like he, him, his. That's kind of
Mhm.
just like the pronunciation order, I guess.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Fascinating. And I love this world and that we can be who we want to be, right? And either way, right? No matter what you decide, you're going to be judged. So you're like just embrace you and do you, and that's kind of been my motto with people. So and then okay, so you've been in the space of sex working. How long have you been doing that for?
so I started sex work back in like March of 2017. So it's been a little over 7 years. I did have moved a little in and out of it. So back when I started about 7 years ago, I started out doing street-based sex work. So like you're a streetwalker. One of my friends kind of introduced me to the industry, and I was like, oh, this is kind of like a convenient little side cash. It was not something I necessarily needed at the time, but definitely that was where I started out. And then I started to explore more of an online realm. And this was like way before there were a lot of the resources out there for sex work that there are now. I was kind of just like trial and error, figuring out what to do. And then OnlyFans became a big thing. There was a huge blow up. Everyone's like, oh my gosh, sex work.
Mhm.
Um, which was interesting. Definitely, there's a lot of like oversaturation in the industry right now. I've explored, well, currently I do online sex work and I do escorting. Um, I'm planning on starting like pro dom training next year, which will be a cool little like upgrade to my work. I've always been open with BDSM with my clients, but it's not something I identify as having like professional training in.
Mhm.
And then also I'm kind of starting to move into professional porn. I've actually been collaborating with some studios to get that started up. So it's been really cool to see myself go from this like street-based area that's very stigmatized, it's very looked down upon, into these other areas of the industry. And I'm hoping to do like more activism work for my community. And so for me, getting to explore different realms of that, I feel like helps to inform how I can better advocate for everyone in the community.
Mhm. Fascinating. And so what, if you think back to beginning, you said it wasn't really for the money. What do you feel like drew you to this industry?
I think part of it is I grew up in a very conservative Mormon Christian household. And for me, like sex was very stigmatized and it was this thing you don't talk about and it was taboo. And so to kind of explore it in this like work sense felt very empowering, and it kind of like it felt kind of rebellious, I feel like too, was probably a big thing for me. It was just kind of this new thing to me. I don't know, but
Mhm.
it just intrigued me, and I started doing it, and I loved it. Not everyone who does sex work loves it, but, like, I was having such great experiences, and part of kind of I started to do some sexuality education about 2 years ago, and started to get into that, like, give me a sec to do some math, like 5-ish years ago is when I started getting interested in that. And a lot of it was a lot of my clients were very like they would share things with me, like things that they were interested in that they didn't have a safe space they could talk about otherwise. And I started like learning things about people, and I got so intrigued and I was like, I want to do so much more of this. So I don't know. I have like a little pin that says sex work saves lives. Like I feel like there's so much good that I've gotten to do in my work that's just made me want to stick with it.
Absolutely. Because I think it's such a gift, right? Like people that are seeking out even something like, professional dom or professional BDSM spaces, sex work, surrogacy partners, and that's kind of moving us in our conversation today around boundaries and communication and safety, right? Like I think what I have found, so I'll kind of share my experience with my husband and I went to a retreat, and they had a professional dominatrix come in and do a workshop for us, also a rigger. And so, but seeing them, right, I think as people, we have just such a idea in our head of what that space might look like. These
Mhm.
experiences were still to this day like the most beautiful things I've ever witnessed. Like seeing these people that were in our space consent to see the professional like walk them through what's going to happen, talk them through their fears, listen to them, love them. Like it was literally just like so fascinating. And I think that there's so much for people to learn in those spaces, especially if you have somebody that like you, right? Like you've done the education, you are professional about it, like you're giving them what they want, but I feel like you're also teaching them so much in these moments.
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely well, one thing, my clients that come in look like your everyday people, but I think the difference between like them interacting with me in this professional space versus if they're out like having casual sex with someone is they come to me because they have something specific that they want to work on. For me, some of them that's like they have a kink that they feel shame around that they need a safe space to explore. Sometimes I have people come in that know I'm trans and they're like questioning their gender identity and they need a safe space to talk about that or explore that, or maybe it's their sexuality that they're questioning. And I'm kind of like the next safe step because I'm a trans man. So then it's like, oh, you're a dude, but you're also female. And so it gives them a safe space to kind of explore maybe like being gay or being lesbian or being bi, etc. Um, as well as I'll have people come in who maybe are like survivors of sexual violence that are trying to figure out their sexuality after this. And I take a very like trauma informed approach to my clients. I'm a survivor myself, so that's something that's important to me to create that space. Um, but
Mhm.
yeah.
And so when you have somebody coming to you, is there some sort of, this is going to sound very clinical, but like an intake process, or do you kind of,
I go through a screening process with my clients, but that's mostly just for me to kind of vet them out for safety. Like I don't take clients that I'm not comfortable with, which for a lot of people is an interesting idea because there's a lot of stigma around sex work and this idea that sex workers are just going to fuck anyone for money when I
Mhm.
have boundaries on what clients I will and won't see. And for some people, that's hard to understand. Um, but when I do like see my clients, like if they're interested in kink, I usually have like I have a yes, no, maybe list that I filled out specifically for my boundaries with clients. And
Mhm.
I'll send that to them. And I'll send them like an empty copy of it, but most of them look at like that 20-page list and go, there's no way in hell I'm filling this thing out. So that's when they go, oh, there's so much that in here, I'm just gonna tell you what I want.
Mhm.
Because a lot of them don't really think that there's more beyond their interests, which is
Mhm.
always interesting.
Mhm.
But usually, other than that, when they come in, I try and have some discussions about boundaries and safe sex up front. A lot of my clients don't get super excited when I'm like, here are my condoms and my dental dams and my finger cuts. We're going to talk about safe sex and how these things work. But I definitely learned from experience that it's easier to have those conversations up front than it is to be in the moment, like, hey, let me pull this thing out.
Mhm. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and then also I'm always like, hey, like these are my boundaries when I'm working. And they have that kind of safe space to explore, like express theirs. I feel like there's a big thing with like modeling for clients because a lot of people, if they aren't used to having these conversations, like we can't expect them to kind of bring that to the table if they don't see how to navigate that.
Mhm. Yeah. And just to again, like give some clarity around some of the terms that we've been used when you say like taking a trauma formed informed approach, can you kind of describe what that looks like for somebody?
For me, that looks a little different. A lot of that for me is just kind of having a safe word that I have a discussion with my clients about, hey, like this is what triggers look like this is how that might feel in your body. If this is coming up for you, like this is what we can do. I always try and reassure my clients and I was like, if you don't want to do something or if something's uncomfortable triggering for you, like we can always stop.
Mhm.
Um, I have because for a lot of those clients, like a lot of them kind of have come in with this idea that, like, oh, well, if I just have sex, I'll be able to get over my trauma or I'll be able to move past this. And that's not how it works. There's a lot more deeper work to do than that. So I try and make sure that we're having conversations that, like, hey, this isn't going to cure all of your trauma. Like, I'm also not a trained therapist. So I can't help you in that regard, but like I can help make this as safe of a space as you want and we can work at your pace.
Mhm.
And also I'm always like, hey, like I know resources. If you want me to refer you to anything, I can.
Mhm.
That's the thing I love about community.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's so important, especially for survivors. And I would say, right, like most people in the population have some sort of trauma in their background, whether it be sexual or not. And so, and again, with a stereotype that would be coming across with sex work, like then combining it with that trauma informed approach, I think it's like people are, I would assume, maybe taken aback in a bit of a sense, right? Like when they see this. And I'm curious, right? Because I think it for any experience, I often feel like it goes beyond sex. Like there's more meaning to the sex than just fucking, right?
Yeah.
So for your clients, can you share maybe some experiences that you've seen unfold from this like emotional revelation that people may have had when working with you?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to think of specific examples.
Mhm.
I had one client who just kind of expressed to me, kind of after our first session, that he loved how safe of an environment it was. I feel like a lot of people have like a specific view of what sex work looks like. And I feel like because I have seen so many of it's like, oh, sex workers, they're like riddled with STIs and they're just like all trafficking victims and it's just paid rape and all of that versus like when I talk about my practice, it's like we're practicing safer sex, we're having conversations around boundaries. There is really like it is such a safe container. And definitely not all sex work is like that, but like for a lot of my clients sometimes because I have a lot of clients that are new and they don't know what to expect and they're coming in with their stigma or they're like afraid that they're getting scammed, which is not always fun to have that conversation as a professional. I'm like, hey, like you need to trust me that this is just the process of going through things. A lot of my one of my favorite things. So a lot of my clients are like, "I don't know what to do with a full hour." And I was like, "Well, we can talk. Like, there's lots of other things we can do besides just have sex." And a
Mhm.
lot of them kind of come in with this idea on like, this is what this is going to look like, or it's going to be like a porn scene when it's not. And I feel like one of the ways that I always fill up time with my clients is I like to share like embarrassing sex stories. Like, I feel like that helps open people up. And
Mhm.
I try to really normalize like sex and normalize like awkward sex and just recognize that like, hey, this isn't going to be perfect, especially with my newer clients that are like anxious about like how this is going to go. But I don't feel like I have a ton of specific stories in that realm
Yeah.
without like disclosing personal information about other people. So
No, respect for sure. Um, so when you are having these conversations around boundaries, you're having these conversations up front, and then because I don't want this to feel like it's very rigid, right? I'm sure it's still very sexy, right? Like these are
yeah.
this coming in the stuff that's unfolding, but how would you say, how would you say like stating the boundaries and having the healthy communication, like what does that make available for you in these experiences?
It makes it so that I can have an enjoyable experience as a professional and that my clients can have an enjoyable experience. I feel like there's nothing that derails a sexual interaction more than like someone getting triggered or having a negative emotional response or me having to stop someone and be like, hey, sorry, we can't actually do this or this is out of boundaries. And so when we have these conversations up front, it makes it really clear that this is what this interaction is going to look like. And I feel like it opens up more room for pleasure. I
Mhm.
feel like a lot of people are uncomfortable with talking about sex and like kills the mood and all these things. But it's like when you have these conversations and when you have clear boundaries in place and you have consent, like it takes so much worry off the table, so much anxiety. And I feel like it opens myself up and my client to be able to enjoy that experience.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I would say the same. I think in even in partnership experiences, right? Like I think boundaries are something that maybe get skipped over if you're in long-term partnerships or if you're married to a person, right? There's sort of this concept that oh, we should just do what they want. Like I don't have the right to say no, or I don't have the right to set boundaries, or right, like what does that mean for my marriage if I have boundaries, you know, or if I have a no to some things. So I think in my work in this past decade, I think that everyone has a no to something. I don't think there's truly a person that is a yes to every single thing out there. And I also think that so many people are so naive to what also is available out there.
Now that leads a good segue into I really love the label for the concept is negotiating from yes because a lot of people come in and want to negotiate from no and it's like I don't want to do xyz or rather than even necessarily just being a no it's like you can do anything you want to me and I get that from partners and I get that from clients
Mhm.
and I feel like I didn't realize how impactful sex work was on my life until I started seeing these mirrors between my work and my partners and being like oh like this is something that's coming up for each of you. I feel like my favorite response is if someone is like, I want you to do anything. It's like, okay, well, are you okay if I like throw you out the window? Or like just throwing out all of those absurd things. And they're like, no, I would never want you to do that. That's insane. And so it's like everyone has their no's.
Mhm.
So like I feel like for some people, like that is a lot broader on like what includes that. For some people, it's like there are some things that they're like, yeah, I'd be totally chill with that. Like some people might be chill if I told them I might throw them out the window.
Mhm.
Most people are not going to be. And so instead, I try and redirect that conversation like, okay, now that we've confirmed that there's lots of no's here, let's negotiate from yes. Let's talk about the things that you want to do. And it's like that can then bring up conversation. I was like, okay, like I'm comfortable with this in these ways. And I feel like when we talk more specifically about what we want, that creates more specific room to talk about the things that we don't want. Because
Mhm.
there's no point in listing out a bunch of things you don't want to do if it's never going to come up.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think again, with you having this professional experience too, you know, being able if somebody says, okay, I want this, um, having the skills to be able to explore that even more. Well, what does it look like if I do it in this way or use this thing to do that? Or right, like you can take it a bit further and maybe even open up their mind
Yeah,
even further to this, right? This maybe like general thing that they are asking for.
for sure. I one story I have was I had a client one day who was like, I just want rough sex.
Mm.
And I'm like, okay, what does rough sex look like to you?
Mhm.
And unfortunately, in this scenario, they didn't really have much for me to work on. I tried a few different things. I was like, this is what fits into this. And then they would get upset and they're like, no, I said I want rough sex. I don't want this. And it's like, okay. So I feel
Mhm.
like another one of the harder areas of my work has been having to recognize where my clients need to take ownership for their own pleasure.
Mhm.
There's only so much I can do. I can't read minds. And
Mhm.
I feel like the same thing comes up with my partners. I'm like, you have to be able to communicate what this looks like for you. Like, I feel like another thing that I hear a lot, both from clients and partners, is like, I just want you to like take control and do whatever you want to me.
Mhm.
And I'm like, okay, but what you're seeking out is you're seeking out a very particular kind of experience and a particular kind of feeling. And what I might imagine doing in this scenario isn't necessarily going to meet that need.
Mhm.
I feel like I really love like Claire Canfield's work on conflict. And one thing that I really liked taking from his work was moving from a focus on positions and outcomes to a focus on needs. Whether that's like within sex or within any kind of conflict, a lot of people come in with like, this is what I want this to look like. This is the outcome that I need. And if that outcome isn't meeting your particular need, it's not going to be helpful. It's like, I can have the need to like, I have to win this game, but winning doesn't necessarily fulfill the need that I have in that space. And it comes up kind of the same in sex. It's like my partner might be like, I'm really into like bondage. And we can explore bondage in a lot of ways. Not all of those are necessarily going to meet kind of the outcome that they want. Maybe they want the aesthetic of it. Maybe they want the feeling of it. Maybe they want certain activities combined with that that they see. And so, like, that's something that we can talk about. That's something that we can explore. And I love having those conversations. And I think those conversations are so vital, but there's still a point where individuals have to kind of reach a level of self awareness as
Mhm.
well as be able to communicate, like, what this looks like for them.
Mhm. Yeah, and in those cases, do you feel like you're helping them through that, or is it sort of like you gotta get more clear and then come back situations?
Yeah, it depends. Some of my clients do a lot better with it than others. Others, I'm kind of like, well, I'm sorry, our time is up and we didn't get to this point. Um, but a lot of my clients are like regular clients, so I'll see them again and we continue to work on some of these things. Others are just like, I'm just in town for the weekend and this is what I was looking for.
Mhm.
So it just really depends. Because some of them, it might also depend on like the work that they've already done themselves versus others. Like I've never had to kind of question some things.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah.
makes sense. Yeah, I feel like they're really getting a true gift with you, right? Like again, it's not just you're not just they're not just entering into to hook up to get off or whatever. They're getting more out of this.
And at the same time, communicating like their central need, what they're looking for is also a big thing beyond just the activities. I feel like this comes up most for me because I see a parallel with this with I practice non-monogamy. And so some of that might be like my partner wants me to send them a text after my date, which can be great. But if that doesn't meet the particular need that they're looking for, if that's like, I want to feel more loved, but this you sent me sending this text doesn't achieve that, then
Mhm.
it's not very helpful. So it's kind of some that ongoing dialogue. But then the same kind of goes in the reverse. If they just communicate something like, I just want to feel more loved, we have to have a conversation on what that looks like. So I think
Mhm.
people tend to be on one or the other end or a mix of both.
Mhm.
So,
And is it mainly individuals that are coming to you, or do you ever have partners come?
so I work, most of my clients are like cis men. I have worked with a few couples before, not a ton. It's not super common. There are other providers that serve couples. I
Mhm.
get a little less of that. I don't know if that's just like the area I'm in, but um, I've worked with a few. I work some with women too, also kind of less common. Uh,
Mhm.
I've had some trans clients too. Some of them are kind of like recently out usually, and that's a big thing, or like they're stepping into kink for the first time and it's not related to their identity at all. So
Mhm.
yeah, I see a variety of clients and I have a pretty big age range. A lot of my clients, like the younger ones, tend to be like college aged, and then some of my clients have been as old as 80. Some of them are kind of like figuring out their sexuality after like a long break, or they've been in a marriage that's been sexless for a while. And they've been working with their partner to kind of like find a dynamic beyond non-monogamy
Hmm.
that kind of can open that up for them.
Yeah. Yeah, and that, I mean, that just goes to say like sex has no limit to it.
Yeah,
Intimacy has no limit to it, and I feel people should be having sex as long as they can.
as
Good
long as they
for
can
as
and
long as
want
they can.
to.
Yes. In fact, it'll probably help them live longer.
Yeah, for
Awesome.
sure.
And so how, first, where are you located? You're not in Michigan,
So
right?
I am located in Utah,
Yeah.
which is a fun little state. I actually moved here from California, so it's quite the contrast.
Hmm.
Very white, very Christian, very not diverse. So that is something I have a lot of people who I see in both my education work and my sex work who are from this area, who have like grown up like in religious backgrounds, who have like a very unique set of trauma for the area. A lot of my clients though are also from like out of state. I have a lot of like BIPOC clients who like recently moved to Utah and are like, this place is so messed up. Like, what's going on? So
Yeah.
I think a good mix of people. But Utah is interesting. Utah has very, very, very poor sex education. It has a very interesting culture, really high like sexual assault rates, really like just not great stuff. Um,
Hmm.
but I do feel like I like doing the work that I do in Utah, even though I would love to leave Utah. Most days I'm like, I'm ready to go.
Hmm.
But I do feel like there's a lot of work to be done here, and I have a lot to contribute to Utah because of just how messed up it is. So
Yeah.
I've stuck around.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I've definitely heard that about Utah. So is there this might also be very naive, but how do people generally find you or somebody like I'm from Michigan, if
Yeah.
somebody's looking for a sex worker, like where do
So
people
I
go?
advertise on an escorting site, which the one I advertise on is Tryst. It's a sex worker run one. The sex workers that run it are based, I want to say in Australia or like New South Wales or New Zealand, one of those areas.
Mhm.
But it's great. I like advertising on it because I know they have lots of great resources for clients. So sometimes my clients come in a lot more informed than previous clients I've had,
Mhm.
versus some of them kind of just stumbled across it. Um, but I just kind of advertise on there and people will search through it and find my profile usually. So
And you said
yeah,
that's Tryst, Trist,
Tryst, Tryst.
Tryst. Okay, I'd like to link that. And that's somebody can go there and find a sex worker anywhere in the world.
Yeah, anywhere in the world.
Okay.
It's Tryst.link. I'll email it to you actually after
Yes.
and you can look at.
Show notes. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then for online stuff like FetLife or things like platforms like that, or are you using only?
Mostly I am on OnlyFans and then I recently joined Fansly because I'm trying to extend that. I don't love how pro-Israel OnlyFans is. And also like it's always good for me to have a backup plan for my online work. So I've
Mhm.
started using Fansly, which is I like some of the features of it, but it doesn't have the most traffic. So
Mhm.
I will gladly plug that one in.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, yeah,
Awesome. Well, is there anything else that we didn't cover today that you feel you wanted to talk about or you feel is important?
not that I can think of. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very grateful to have you on and hear your story, hear about the work that you're doing. I think that this is great. Like people need this. People need to hear that this is also available to them, right? It's not
Yeah,
just for lack of better terms, like it's not just prostitution. It's not just, right, like going, like I said, it's not just the sex going to get off. There are spaces where this is more meaningful. Yeah.
yeah,
Awesome. Well, and I am very excited for you to do the pro dom work. I follow Kimmy Inch. That's my girl. She does training and stuff for dominatrix. She's in Texas, I believe. Um, but yeah, so I'm excited for you to be
yeah,
able to add that. That'll be very cool.
yeah. Thank you.
Mhm. All right. Well, thank you so much, Yash, for coming on the show. We'll make sure to link all the things in the show notes. And do you have Instagram or any like social media stuff that you want to share?
Yes, I do. My Instagram is Its Majesty the Emperor. It's probably pretty easy to find if someone looks it up.
Mhm.
But I can also send you the link for that.
Oh,
But yeah,
cool.
okay. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Yeah, take care.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.